It was a night I'll never forget. The rain had been falling since late afternoon, cold and unrelenting, soaking everything in its path. By the time I stood on the front porch of the house I had called home for 35 years, the gutters were spilling muddy water onto the cracked driveway. The porch light above me flickered weakly, as though it too wasn't sure it belonged here anymore. Inside, I had imagined maybe there would be a small cake, or at least a quiet, happy birthday. But when I opened the door, the only thing waiting for me were 3 faces. My father with a glass of whiskey, my mother's lips pressed tight, and my younger brother leaning against the wall with a smirk. And then I heard the words that shattered everything. "You don't belong here anymore. Take your things and leave." It was my mother's voice, cold, final. My heart stopped. My birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a deadline. I froze, suitcase already packed by hands that weren't mine, sitting at my feet on the porch. That small detail hurt the most. They hadn't said it in the heat of anger. They had planned this. They had decided I was disposable. For a moment, silence filled the house. My father lifted his glass and sneered. "Paying a few bills doesn't buy you a lifetime stay, princess." The word princess, once tender when I was a little girl climbing into his lap, now twisted into a knife. My mother looked away. And my brother? He laughed under his breath, satisfied as if this was the victory he had been waiting for. I should have shouted back. I should have reminded them of the years I had sacrificed. But the words caught in my throat. My chest burned, yet no sound came. Instead, I reached down, picked up the suitcase, and stepped out into the storm. The rain welcomed me like an old friend, running down my face until I couldn't tell where the water ended and the tears began. I walked away without looking back, because if I did, I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to keep going. That night, I found myself in a small motel room that smelled faintly of bleach and damp carpet. The mattress was stiff, the wallpaper faded, the kind of place that reminds you you're not meant to stay long. I sat on the edge of the bed, suitcase at my feet, listening to the storm tap against the thin window glass. My birthday. 35 years old, and this was how it ended. Not with love, not even with indifference, but with rejection. I thought I would cry immediately, but no tears came. I just sat frozen, my body heavy, my chest hollow. And then the memories began to surface. I remembered the winter when I was 19. The furnace broke in the middle of a brutal cold snap. My father cursed. My brother hid under his blankets, and I was the one who walked through the snow to the hardware store. I spent the last of my paycheck on parts, watched tutorials by flashlight, and brought that furnace back to life at 2 a.m. They never asked how it got fixed. They just woke up warm again. I remembered Jacob's car crash. He'd been drinking, though no one dared to say it aloud. My parents panicked, not for his safety, but for the bills. I took out a loan in my name. For years, I made those payments while Jacob bragged about his resilience to his friends. My parents beamed with pride at him. No one even looked at me. I remembered storms ripping shingles from the roof. My father sat inside with his beer, shouting about contractors. My brother was out at a bar. And me? I was the one climbing the ladder, hammer in hand, fighting the rain to save the house from collapsing. Over and over, I gave. Quietly, silently, without thanks, without acknowledgement. Sitting on that motel bed, I realized I had lived my whole life inside a cage made of sacrifice. And the cruelest part? I had built the bars myself. Still, guilt whispered in my ear. They're your parents. What if they need you? What if walking away makes you heartless? I gripped the mattress hard, my nails biting into the fabric. The truth was clear. They didn't need me. They needed what I could give. Money, labor, silence. They had mistaken my love for obligation, and they had sharpened it into a weapon. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. 27 missed calls, 15 voicemails, all from them. I pressed play. My mother's voice came first, trembling. Honey, there must be some mistake. You wouldn't just walk away. Call us, please, we're family. Then my father's voice, harsh and slurred. You think you can just cut us off? You'll regret this. Family always wins, Emma, always. And Jacob. His laugh cut through me. Thanks for leaving, sis. Finally, it's just us now, the way it should have been all along. I dropped the phone onto the bed. My stomach turned. Even in desperation, there was no apology, no recognition of what I had done, just guilt, threats, and mockery. I stood, pacing the room. The walls closed in. My chest tightened until I could no longer hold it back. And then, after years of silence, the tears finally came, violent, unstoppable sobs that shook through me, ripping open every scar I had buried. I cried for the birthdays forgotten, for the love I gave up, for the girl I once was who believed sacrifice would one day be rewarded. When the sobs slowed, I noticed something small on the desk, a box of matches left by the motel. My breath caught as I thought of the cake back on the counter of that house, the cake I had bought myself, the one they never touched. They hadn't even lit a candle. So I tore a scrap of paper from my notebook, wrote the words, "For me," on it, and placed it beside the matches. I struck one, the tiny flame flickering weakly against the dim walls. "Happy birthday, Emma," I whispered. For the first time in years, I said the words out loud. The flame trembled, but stayed alive, and in its glow, so did I. I blew out the match, smoke curling in the air, and in that quiet moment something inside me shifted. They could call me ungrateful. They could paint me as the villain. They could even try to erase me. But never again would they control me. I picked up my phone, opened my banking app, and began scrolling. Utility bills in my name, insurance policies, loans. Every line was a reminder of how deeply I had been woven into their survival. One by one, I began making changes, canceling auto payments, freezing joint accounts, removing my name. It wasn't revenge, it was survival. It was the first step of finally choosing myself. Outside, the storm began to calm. Inside, for the first time in decades, my mind felt clear. Tomorrow, I knew, there would be consequences. Tomorrow, the phone would light up with anger, with pleas, with blame. Tomorrow, the world might even call me cruel. But tonight, in that small motel room, with the faint smell of smoke and rain in the air, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The next morning, sunlight slipped weakly through the thin motel curtains. For a moment in that quiet space, I forgot where I was. I reached across the bed, expecting to hear the familiar creak of the old house, the smell of burnt coffee drifting from the kitchen. But then I saw the suitcase, still sitting on the floor, and the truth came rushing back. I wasn't going home. Not today, not ever. My phone buzzed again. 30 new messages, 10 voicemails. The notifications stacked one after another, relentless. My stomach twisted, but I pressed play. My mother's voice, soft and broken. "Honey, please, you can't just leave us like this. Your father isn't well. He hasn't eaten. We're falling apart without you." Then came my father, his tone darker, angrier. "You think you're clever, Emma? Pulling out the money, shutting off the lights? You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back. You'll see." And Jacob, always Jacob. "Mom's crying. Dad's furious. Everyone's talking about how selfish you are. Nice work, sis. You finally showed your true colors." I dropped the phone, my chest tightening. Guilt clawed at me, threatening to undo everything. But then another message appeared. This one from Tyler, my cousin, the only person who had ever really seen me. His text was blunt, almost cruel in its simplicity. "Dad told Mom to fake chest pains next if guilt doesn't work. Don't fall for it." I read it again. My hands shook. The weight of it hit me like a stone. Their desperation wasn't about love or fear of losing me. It was about control. They weren't broken because I was gone. They were broken because they couldn't use me anymore. The guilt that had been tightening around my throat loosened just a little. That afternoon, I walked into a small diner near the motel. The waitress greeted me with a kind smile, one that made my chest ache. I realized how long it had been since anyone looked at me with kindness. As I sipped burnt coffee, I overheard whispers from the next booth. "Did you hear about Emma?" one voice murmured. "Her parents say she abandoned them, left them sick and starving." Another voice replied, doubtful. "Funny. I remember seeing her fixing that roof in the rain last year. Didn't her parents brag that she paid their bills?" I sat frozen, staring at the scratched table. The gossip had started. My parents were painting me as a villain, a selfish daughter who turned her back on her family. But cracks were forming. People were beginning to remember. The next few days blurred together. I stayed at the motel, avoiding familiar places, but the whispers reached me anyway. Screenshots from Facebook posts, comments from neighbors. Some called me ungrateful, others defended me. Every word felt like a stone, heavy and sharp. And then one morning, an envelope arrived at the motel's front desk. My name scrawled across it in messy handwriting. Inside were papers, a lawsuit filed by my own father, accusing me of theft, of abandoning them in their time of need, of emotional cruelty. My knees went weak, my vision blurred. They weren't just smearing my name in town, they were trying to destroy me legally. I sat on the motel bed, papers spread around me like shards of glass. And for the first time, the sobs didn't come. Instead, a cold, sharp calm settled over me. I picked up the phone and called a legal aid office in Columbus. My voice didn't tremble as I explained everything. The woman on the other end listened quietly, then said words I'll never forget. "You have a strong case. Honestly, Emma, it sounds like you should be the one suing for exploitation." The word exploitation echoed in my head. That was what it had been all along. Years of labor, years of silence, years of being drained dry. Not love, not duty, exploitation. The legal aid office asked me to gather proof. Receipts, bank statements, records. I already had them. For years, I had kept everything, almost compulsively. Maybe some part of me had always known this day would come. That night, I spread the papers across the motel desk. Utility bills in my name, mortgage payments taken from my account, loan documents signed only by me, bank transfers that had kept them afloat again and again. Each piece of paper wasn't just evidence, it was a memory, a wound. I stayed up until dawn, sorting, scanning, organizing. By the time the sun rose, I had built a fortress of truth. The calls from my parents grew more desperate. My mother's voicemails were syrupy sweet. "Emma, please, we can fix this. Take down the posts, stop this nonsense. You don't want people to think badly of us, do you?" My father's texts were venomous. "Family always gets the last word. You'll regret crossing me." And Jacob, always lurking, mocking. "You think anyone cares about your little pity party? Everyone knows you're crazy." But for the first time, their words didn't break me. Because I wasn't powerless anymore. I had proof. I had allies. And I had myself. Days later, I walked through the town square during the autumn festival. Strings of lights hung from the courthouse. Children laughed in bounce houses. The smell of caramel apples drifted through the air. I kept to the edges, but eyes followed me everywhere. Near the pumpkin carving booth, I heard my father's voice, loud, performative. My daughter abandoned us after everything we gave her. Kids these days, no loyalty, no gratitude. Some people nodded, sympathy etched on their faces. But others exchanged skeptical glances. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Didn't she pay their bills for years? I saw her shoveling their driveway at 16 while they yelled from the porch. I stood frozen, torn between stepping forward to confront him and turning away. My friend Nora, who had been by my side through all of this, touched my arm gently. "Don't. Let them talk. The truth will outlive the lies." And she was right, because slowly the tide began to turn. Neighbors started to speak up, old teachers, former co-workers, people who had watched from a distance all these years, too afraid to interfere, but who now felt emboldened by the truth. I posted my story online, calm, factual, clinical, screenshots of bills in my name, bank records, receipts, a timeline of every sacrifice, and at the end, a single line. When they told me to leave, they didn't just lose a daughter, they lost the person who kept the lights on. At first, silence, then a flood. Comments, shares, messages. One neighbor wrote, "I remember seeing her fixing that roof alone." Another posted, "Cullen always bragged he never paid a cent once Emma got her job." The truth spread like wildfire, and for the first time, my parents' lies crumbled in public. I wish I could say it ended there. That truth was enough. But my father wasn't done. He stormed into the courthouse, red-faced, shouting about witch hunts and manipulation. My mother wept loudly beside him, her sobs echoing through the cinder block walls. But the evidence spoke louder than tears. The officer looked at me, calm, steady. "You did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As I stepped outside, the autumn sun was blinding. The crisp air filled my lungs like freedom. For the first time, I wasn't dragging chains behind me. The courthouse loomed behind me, shrinking with every step I took. And as the wind picked up, scattering fallen leaves around my feet, I whispered to myself words I had waited my whole life to believe. I am enough. The days after the courthouse felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. For so many years, my life had been filled with noise, the constant ringing of phones demanding money, the sharp bark of my father's voice, the heavy silence of my mother's disappointment, the careless laughter of my brother, and now with it all cut off, the quiet felt unnatural, almost eerie. But slowly, that silence began to transform. It was no longer emptiness. It was peace. I stayed at Nora's apartment for a while. Her place was small, cluttered with secondhand furniture and the faint smell of cinnamon from the candles she always burned. She never asked questions. I wasn't ready to answer. She just made coffee in the mornings and left a blanket folded neatly on the couch for me at night. One evening, we sat at her kitchen table, sorting through the pile of documents I had carried with me. She looked at the stacks of receipts, bank statements, and loan agreements, her eyes wide. "Emma," she said softly, "you spent half your life saving them." I nodded, staring at the papers, and they still called me a burden. Her hand reached across the table, steady and warm. "You're not a burden. You never were. You were the glue. They just didn't deserve you." The words sank into me, healing something raw and broken. Weeks passed. I found a small rental unit downtown. Nothing special, just an old brick building with creaky floors and drafty windows. But when I signed the lease, a thrill ran through me. For the first time in 35 years, I had a place that was mine. Moving in was slow. I bought furniture piece by piece, all secondhand. A couch with sun-faded cushions, a wobbly kitchen table someone had loved before me, a chipped mug from a thrift store that quickly became my favorite. Each object carried history, but together they began to form something new. My space, my life. I painted the walls pale blue, the color of open skies, of freedom. At night, I sat by the single window in the living room, watching the town lights flicker like distant stars. The silence no longer felt like a void. It felt earned. One Saturday, while unpacking a final box, I found something I thought I had lost. The tiny plastic cake topper from my last birthday. A single candle, bent and cheap, wrapped in tissue paper. I held it in my hand for a long time, the late afternoon sun glinting off its surface. It didn't hurt anymore. It didn't feel like a reminder of rejection. It felt like proof that I had survived. I placed it on a shelf above my desk, not as a symbol of pain, but as a private trophy. A reminder of the night everything ended, and the night everything began. But healing wasn't linear. Some mornings I woke with the weight of old guilt pressing on my chest. Messages still trickled in, distant relatives who thought they knew the story, siding with my parents, calling me heartless. For years, I would have bent under that pressure, but not anymore. I learned to hit delete, to block numbers, to choose myself. One evening, a note slipped under my door. No return address, just a small card written in careful handwriting. You were never the problem. Some people just fear the ones they can't control. I never found out who sent it. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe someone from church, maybe a stranger who had heard my story. But it didn't matter, because deep down I already knew the truth. Months passed, life became softer, slower. I found work at a local bookstore, the kind of place where the smell of old paper lingered in the air and sunlight pooled across wooden shelves. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I shelved books, brewed coffee for customers, and lost myself in the quiet rhythm of ordinary days. One afternoon, an older woman came in. She lingered by the counter, then finally spoke. "You're Emma, aren't you?" My stomach tightened, bracing for judgment. But her eyes were kind. "I just want you to know," she said, her voice trembling. "We all knew how much you gave. We just didn't say it, and I'm sorry for that." Tears stung my eyes. I nodded, whispering, "Thank you." It struck me then how powerful it was to be seen, even briefly, after years of being invisible. The seasons turned. Winter came and went. Spring bloomed with fragile hope, and summer warmed the old brick walls of my apartment. Each season marked a layer of healing, a step further from the chains that once held me. And yet sometimes, late at night, I thought about them. My parents, my brother. Did they ever sit in the silence and realize what they had lost? Did they ever feel the absence of the daughter who had carried them for so long? Maybe. Maybe not. But it wasn't my burden anymore. Because family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by love, respect, and kindness. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people who raised you in order to become the person you were meant to be. Din sound. Now, as I sit by the window of my little apartment, city lights glowing softly below, I smile to myself. For the first time in my life, I know these words to be true. I am enough. And to anyone listening who has ever felt invisible in their own family, who has given and given only to be cast aside, hear me when I say this. You are not alone. Sometimes choosing yourself means losing everything you thought you needed. But in that loss, you may find the most important thing of all, freedom. Samatesanti? Voiceover closing CTA. If you've ever faced a moment where choosing yourself meant leaving behind the people you loved, I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below, because your truth might be the lifeline someone else needs. And if this story touched you, subscribe for more journeys like this. Remember, family drama doesn't define you. How you rise from it does.